This is Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in Long Beach today, and we are joined by Duf Sundheim. He is a candidate for the United States Senate. The primary will be held in June 2016, running as a Republican. And I want to speak with you about, the last few weeks and months have been very, very scary for so many of us.
Yes.
We think about Paris, we think about Colorado Springs, right nearby San Bernardino.
Right.
What are you hearing, sir, as you travel up and down the state with regard to the general mood?
Well, I think there's a real sense of fear. You know, there was the thought that this stuff couldn't happen here, and now it clearly can. And so what are we going to do about it? What does it mean in terms of the police force, in terms of the tools that they need? There was a feeling that drones were totally inappropriate. Now we find out in this situation that drones could have been very helpful. So, you know,
with regard to...
Well, when they had the confrontation with the two people in San Bernardino, they didn't know what their situation was in the car. And if they had had a drone, they could, look and see what's going on. Also, there was a major concern about whether we were militarizing the police too much. And I think that this is just one data point, but I think it's a very clear data point that maybe they do need those tools given the environment that we're in. So my concern is that when we have an event like this, people tend to go to their corners. And what I think we need to do is we need to have leadership that brings us together, because it's every American that faces this concern. We're going to have different views as to the best way to deal with this, but I think we really need to focus on coming together so that we can find consensus to deal with this problem, because frankly, it's not going to be going away anytime soon.
And when we speak about coming together, oftentimes we come together within our own units, our own corners, and we start pointing fingers.
Exactly right.
And look, for better or for worse, what we see is that in a significant number of these incidents, the common denominator is radical Islam. And that can be very scary for Americans. Many Americans don't know anyone of the Islamic faith.
Correct.
And so how do we speak about the issue? I mean, there was the question whether we call it radical Islam or whether we call it jihadism. I mean, even that, just the syntax and the words, we don't know where to go.
Well, I think we need to start having that conversation. I grew up in small town in LaGrange, Illinois, outside of Chicago, and I didn't know any Asians or
Asians.
Nobody. So when I went to Stanford, that was the first time I had a certain hesitancy, not just a hesitancy. I didn't.
It had nothing to do with
or fear or anything. But we don't have those types of relationships. So I'm a mediator. And what I really find out is that you really benefit by just listening to people. So what I'm going to be working on as I go travel around the state is bring people together from different religious backgrounds to just start having that conversation. Because once you understand and when you listen to somebody and you find out all the things that you have in common, you have to have that foundation before you can move forward.
When you think about Islam, Islam is one of the three great Abrahamic faiths. I mean, you think about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, monotheistic. So there is commonality here, but yet for so many Americans, Islam feels so very foreign and scary.
Well, and there's such a small percentage of the population, so you don't naturally come in touch with them. So the concept is, and before we had the Iranian hostage situation, people had no understanding of what Islam was.
It's funny you bring that up. I remember that. I was in high school at the time, and there had been Iranian...
Oh, I wasn't.
Okay. There had been Iranian fellow students. And some of my peers were just brutal to these Iranian kids who obviously had fled the regime, and presumably if someone is of the Islamic faith living in America, presumably it's because they prefer the American way.
Exactly right. And they would go so far as to, they wouldn't say they are Iranian. They were Persian, right? Of course. And so, but that was our first exposure. And then we have 9/11. So that is the way people are being introduced to these people, and they don't understand how much we have in common. So we do need to have those conversations.
And the issue gets further complicated when you look at the refugee situation.
Oh, huge.
I mean, we look at what's happening in Europe.
Yes.
I think there's almost 1 million refugees from Syria and Iraq.
Yes.
Yet, because one of the Paris perpetrators may have been a refugee,
Right.
1 out of 1 million,
Right.
there's this overwhelming fear of refugees.
Right, right.
And that, again, America's conflicted on it. We are a nation of immigrants and refugees.
Absolutely.
And yet we are trying to figure out, how do we let these folks in, if at all?
Right, right. Well, that's something that we need to look at. I mean, I think that you're right. We've always been a country of refugees, but we also can't be blind to what's going on. And there is a real concern about whether we have the tools in place to make sure that we aren't inadvertently letting in people that are going to create us great harm.
And I think that is a very fair concern.
Right.
Do we have the tools in place?
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
But for argument's sake,
Right.
the debate didn't seem to turn as much on the tools, but on pitting against each other, the them, the pointing. We don't want them in our country. You know, it's those single Islamic men that we want out of our country, and it just...
It's not. It's not. It's to be expected. I mean, we have this concept that we're rational beings. We aren't. We're emotional beings.
Right.
And one of the most basic emotions that we have is fear. Right. That's how our species has made it this long.
Right.
So it's
Fight
a
or flight.
natural. Yes, it's a natural instinct. But what has made us be able to move out of the swamp and have our eyes on the stars is that we have developed rational thinking. And so the role of the leader is to understand that natural fear, but to guide them towards a better future. And so from my perspective, with respect to the refugee issue, if the Director of Homeland Security and the Director of the FBI says, yes, we have the systems in place to be able to keep those people out, then we should let them in. But until we get those assurances, I think it would be most appropriate for us to not let them in until that occurs.
And then there's the question, as we think about San Bernardino, about gun control, gun rights, ammunition.
Right.
I mean, the debate goes on, and you know, for better or for worse, we have not seen national gun legislation pass. Query whether that's the approach we want, but we seem polarized on the issue. The president is literally, he's paralyzed on it. Whether that's appropriate or not, I don't know, but where do we go with this as someone who's running for the U.S. Senate?
Well, California has the strictest gun laws in the country. So we're clearly seeing in that San Bernardino incident the limitations of gun laws.
Right, and as we know, as we believe, some of those guns and ammunition probably did not come from California, but you know, we have porous borders, and I don't mean in Mexico, I mean in Arizona and Nevada.
And so what I would like to do is I'd look at, you know, we do have a no-fly list. And it seems to me to make perfect sense to say, look, if you're on that no-fly list, you shouldn't be getting guns.
Yet your friends currently in the Senate that are Republicans have voted against that.
Well, you know, again, I think that's too easily going to the corners rather than finding the consensus. So especially within 24 hours after something like that happens, I think we have to seriously, from my position, you start with the Second Amendment. Right, I'm a strong proponent of the Second Amendment. But then you have to look at the public safety. And then if you are able to develop a rule, such as if you're on the no-fly zone, no guns, if you're a former criminal, no guns, if you're mentally unstable, no guns, you need to do background checks. That all seems to be common sense rules within the Second Amendment.
His name is Duf Sundheim. He is a candidate for the United States Senate running as a Republican. The election will be held in June 2016, then the general in November. My name is Brad Pomerance. We're in Long Beach today, and I want to thank you so much for joining us on Charter.